Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Version Everything, the Journey of Altissia into GitOps. My name is Becky, and I'll be your moderator today. We're really excited to have Gregory Schiano, CTO of Altissia, and Michele Mancioppi, Technical Product Manager at Instana, join us today. So before I hand over to our speakers, I have a few housekeeping items to cover regarding this webinar. First, today's webinar will be recorded and it will be available on demand after the live session. It will also be sent to you via email, or alternatively, you can access it through Instana's website. We'd really like to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have a question for either of our speakers, please feel free to send it through the chat box on the right-hand side. We'll be answering questions at the end of today's session. And if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by handing it over to our speakers.
Bit of a situation with Gregory trying to connect with 3-4 different devices.
I'm there.
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm sorry.
This is the anti-dem effect.
It was crazy.
In the call.
But I'm there.
Cool. So Gregory, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you about GitOps and what type of path brought you there from Altissia. I have a few slides, and there is at least one demo on the Instana side where we will show you how very soon you'll be able to do real GitOps in terms of configuration of the Instana agent. And maybe Gregory, you can also show something of how you folks are doing it, right?
I'll try, but I'm not on my usual computer today, so I'll try to do something.
All right. We have a few backup slides that are taken from a talk that is going to be available on September the 17th at Skill Up Days, and we are going to use them as sort of canvas for our conversation. In short, so just to put down the names, I'm Michele, he's Gregory, he's the CTO of Altissia and GitOps aficionado. Do you want to say something more about yourself?
You summed up quite okay. So yeah, I'm Gregory, and I'm in the IT sector since 14 years or 15 years now. I stopped counting. And yeah, I work for Altissia since 5 years and a half now. We're doing language learning, and yes, I'm a big fan of Devops culture and GitOps.
But you're also among the customers that have the pleasure to interact with one that is one of the most versed in all things DevOps and GitOps.
Yeah. So I'm a customer of Instana since few years, and we've been in touch multiple times, and I'm pretty involved in many things, especially on the Kubernetes part of Instana and the Java parts.
Now, let's give a short primer about what is GitOps, because this moniker is flying a lot around, but there's also some confusion around the terminology, right? So fundamentally, GitOps is the fact that you declare what your infrastructure should look like, and you modify this declaration through a version and control system, which usually is Git, but not necessarily. And then you have these changes, so the reality of your production is aligned to what it should be in your declaration from some automation. Do you agree, Gregory?
Fully. That's the definition.
It's something that I find today has finally become viable across the stack because of the container orchestration.
Yeah, indeed. It helped a lot, and all the Kubernetes Swarm and OpenShift word helped a lot in that, because it's declarative syntax and it's already checking some boxes.
I think it's also very important to underline the declarative part, because infrastructure as code, which is ultimately the secret sauce to make the GitOps, has been around for forever. I remember doing Chef 12 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, but that was more imperative. I mean, you could define resources, but there was a lot of logic that we would specify. It's a bit like building your Jenkins pipeline with Gradle and Jenkins files.
Mm.
But in GitOps now, it's about declaration.
Yes. Yeah. And the whole stack is now very declarative. A lot of YML. In the past, it was the JSON generation. Now it's the YML generation.
We took a step backwards, by the way, with that in the industry.
It did. And all the tools adapted to that.
There is actually, interestingly, now there are tools that are doing something else to avoid you doing YAML, like KSONet and JSONet.
Yes, indeed.
So it is YAML, but people want to hide it. I'm personally a fan of TOML and HCL. I would like to see them used more often. It's just because I'm horrible at white spaces, and the semantic white spaces of YAML, I can't wrap my head around it.
So you don't like Python then?
No, I have to. Python is one of the runtimes that I have the pleasure of shepherding at Instana, so I have to like it. I find that in the scope of programming language makes much more sense than a configuration language.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
For no better reason that it's pretty much agreed upon in the industry that if you want to program, you need an IDE with rich support. But configuration, I would like to have something that I can happily modify on my mobile phone.
You do that often, really? You're further than GitOps then.
No, but it doesn't mean that the stuff gets immediately done. Configuration is something that you are supposed to treat it as a text file, but a text file with semantic indentation, I don't know. I can't say I like it too much.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, this is on this slide. You can see the idea around GitOps, that you have your product teams are modifying the declaration of what it has to be at several different levels: application, containers, infrastructure, networking even. And you have a versioning story. And then there is some automated system that is enacting that declaration and keeping in sync your production when things unavoidably break, right? Containers die, you need to have them recreated automatically for you. What is your opinion? How far are we today in the industry in terms of maturity at the level of networking and infrastructure?
There are multiple levels. I mean, you can rely on cloud services on which you abstract a lot of these parts, and you delegate that to another provider, basically. But then otherwise you can also manage. A lot of companies are still doing that, managing their own dedicated servers, or having a layer with some virtualization using VMware or Proxmox or other technologies. And there, this is a bit more complex to manage in terms of networking. There are tools doing it, but I feel that the industry needs to evolve even more. VMware still has a lot of tools around their virtualization. So it's been a while I didn't touch the APIs of VMware, but back in the days it was pretty tough to manage stuff through the APIs of VMware and automate stuff, unless you use the tools they provide. But then the cost is usually unaffordable for small companies or medium companies.
And they tend to be poorly integrated with different layers of infrastructure, right? And here on the slide, there is a sort of overview of all the levels of the stack and what your infrastructure code as code has to cover. Of course, the higher the abstraction level in your computing platform, the less you have to take care about. For example, if you do just Lambdas, then you interact with the AWS API, and that's it. You may want to do some VPC, but just keep all the containers underneath.
Yes, definitely.
Also, the amount of tooling out there is pretty insane right now.
You have to find your way.
And you have to piece together fundamentally a best of breed, depending on the computing platforms that you want to stitch together.
Yeah. But also sometimes there is no good or bad choice. It's just a matter of decision and checking within your teams what are the competencies which are available. It's similar to choosing the programming language you want to use for your company. You have many choice, no good or bad solution. Just a matter of looking at what are the competencies, what your team knows, or what you want to learn.
And what is so the you're making the case that there is not one way to do it. It's a very fluid situation, and you can pick and choose different tools.
Yes.
But do you feel that there are several options out there, for example, for Kubernetes, that are production ready and mature enough to be used?
Oh, I can't tell that I tried all of them. In terms of orchestration, we tried many tools. We ended up with Kubernetes because basically we saw that the industry was converging towards Kubernetes, or Kubernetes like OpenShift is Kubernetes like.
Yeah.
And when we look also at the cloud providers, they all now have a Kubernetes platform as a service. So this one is probably becoming a standard. It's evolving quite fast, so for how long we don't know, but it's becoming a standard. For all the rest, I think it's pretty spread.
Actually, I have to say that when we talk about Kubernetes as a standard API, I have the weird feeling like back in the days when Microsoft would embrace, extend, and extinguish, or try to do that with Java. Now, there are cloud providers that try really hard, sometimes a bit too much, in my opinion, to differentiate, providing different subsets of the Kubernetes API with different levels of abstraction. I'm personally not much of a fan, because I was hoping against hope that Kubernetes would be the lingua franca for orchestration, but well, I guess that's the industry.
Yeah. They are all trying to differentiate and perhaps sometimes try to simplify the stuff. Personally, I'm a big fan of avoiding vendor locks. So Kubernetes is a really good choice for us because it's pretty standard, and as long as theoretically, we got some cases where it was not the case, especially with storage. But you can deploy your solution on any Kubernetes platform or Kubernetes on-premise and stuff like that. And so that's how we do it on our side. We try to avoid vendor lock, so we stick on Kubernetes. But as I said, sometimes you get surprises with network or with ingresses or with storage. And we got an issue while deploying on Azure due to storage, for example.
The ingresses are one of my favorite. I mean, back in the day, every real man would code an editor. Today, every cloud native person is making a proxy. Those proxies become ingresses, right?
Yes.
Like if you just count the dialects of Envoy and wrappings around Envoy, there's like at least Envoy, Ingress, Ambassador, Glue. Let's not even talk about Nginx with all the wrappings that there are. HA proxy, it's a very ancient but still very used.
Yeah, very used. Yes. Proxy. Traffic is the one we use. Yeah. It's pretty great. Good integration.
There is also what's his name? Always based on Go. Caddy proxy. It's also a popular choice.
Didn't know this one.
So let's go back to GitOps, because we are ranging pretty wide into the state of the Kubernetes nation. What tooling do you use to do GitOps at Altissia?
So Git first. Then we use Jenkins. So we use Jenkins on Kubernetes. We use the Jenkins operator to deploy Jenkins for the pipelining. We did quite a lot on Jenkins, especially we developed a kind of standard library to manage the pipelines over all the projects. So we have a kind of platform team that works on these standard tools for the rest of the teams. Then we use Kubernetes to deploy on the platform. We use Helm, a lot of Helm and charts. Similarly, on Helm, we created a kind of library that simplifies the work on the charts for all the microservices, so the developers can focus on basically bringing business value and not trying to figure out how Go template works, because it's sometimes quite tricky.
Oh, yes.
What else? We are strongly evaluating Flux. The teams, my teams trust in these two quite well. I'm not still convinced of the added value because we use a lot of Helm, and deploying with Helm is just a one-liner, deploying or upgrading or rollbacking. But when you have microservices and many services that you want to update, Flux can help you deploying each service as a standalone, where we tend to deploy currently all the services within meta charts. So we aggregate all the services within a meta chart for an environment, and then we deploy it on that environment.
So fundamentally, if I understand right, you commit changes to Git. Those are picked up by Jenkins. Jenkins uses the Helm command line.
We use GitLab, not GitHub. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. So GitLab, and then you have GitLab triggers Jenkins. Jenkins uses Helm to deploy on Kubernetes. Yes,
basically yes. We still have to. So the full deployment, there is still manual action to launch the deployment. So there is a review of the modification. We use a diff plugin on Helm that allows us to review what will be deployed, and then the launch is done.
And why didn't you choose? So did you consider the Helm operator?
The Helm operator. I don't know this one.
If I was researching it the other day.
Okay.
Let me see if let me quickly check on my phone if it's something that actually exists and I didn't just dream it up. If I remember right, the Helm operator fundamentally allows you to keep watch on a bunch of repositories and just enact. So instead of pushing the change through the Helm command line, you have your things pulled by the Helm operator.
Pulling but basically Flux supports that. So that's what Flux doing. Flux is able to look at Git repos with Helm charts and take decision of deploying there.
So as we said,
push or pull
is the same, right?
Yeah.
As long as it is done automatically, then it doesn't really matter. It's an implementation detail.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's talk about the kind of impact that GitOps has had on Altissia, the way you build software.
Okay. So the first impact is so basically the Helm charts were in the beginning managed by the ops team, but we decided to put that closer to the development team. So there is some first DevOps culture that needs to be pushed towards the teams because they need to feel responsible of their product up to the production. If you don't have that in your teams, forget about GitOps. That's always the first step to do. Mm-hmm. Then there is some training. It's some technologies they're not used to use. So luckily on our teams, they were already very used to containers, and so because the dev is using extensively containers locally on their laptops, but they had to be trained on Kubernetes, on Helm, how to manage Helm charts, etc. So and then it's the most difficult part was to define how we wanted our pipeline to be done, when we wanted to trigger stuff, agree on the standardize everything, and decide ops with dev with the product owners or the release manager, how this whole pipeline should work, and make it evolve based on the needs and on I mean, it's a try and catch process where you try something, it doesn't work. So being very iterative on the process and on the evolution of the process.
I find very interesting the reference. So the GitOps, fundamentally between the lines, you said GitOps is a set of technologies, but before you get to use the technologies, you need to solve the human problem of becoming a DevOps organization.
Yes, definitely. And you need also to work with some people who are not interested in that word and push the culture and push the stuff. So on the human side, it's as a CTO, it's a lot of efforts and it's still a lot of efforts.
Did you find pushback in adopting DevOps?
Did you find pushback?
So something that I've seen in my previous career at SAP is that a lot of people that identified as operators were very afraid of fundamentally losing their position. They were at the same time required to learn a lot of things they were not used before. They were required to think in ways that they hadn't before, to take more responsibility, and they actually felt the risk of losing job security, because if now developers get to do part of their job, are they going to become developers?
Yeah. The old system administrator job has evolved pretty much a lot. It's a totally different job now, and people had to adapt quite quickly. And in between, also new generation of ops came in the markets, in the working market, and are immediately adapted to that. So pushback, I didn't get a lot of pushback, at least on the upside. On the dev side, I got more pushback of developers who wants just to code and don't want to touch the production or be closer to the production, even if there is a lot of automation. They're just interested in delivering their code. But basically, everyone agrees that the more automation you put, the less mistake there will be, and the faster you can iterate.
But with great powers also come great responsibilities, right?
Yes.
So the moment you give developers the fundamentally the power with pressing a key to change production, then all of a sudden they need to think so much harder because there is potentially less gatekeeping, right?
Yes, definitely. But it's also a matter of trust. Trust is really important when you are in the DevOps culture. You need to have people trust each other, but also you need to trust first people.
And you also need tools that are going to make your life easy, because the more it's automated, the more you need some automation to tell you when things are going horribly wrong.
Yes, and that's pretty tough.
Right? That's the whole point of Instana, is to provide you
that's the whole point of Instana. Yes, definitely.
That's actually something that we had to see coming. The whole point of making fundamentally a tool where you deploy an agent with a very easy day one experience, and then it automatically adapts to changes in the environment. That is something that we saw a long way coming, because you need actually to have super automated observability if you want to be able to keep up with the speed of change without compromising quality.
Yeah, and that's a point on which Instana is very good, because you don't need to care a lot about the configuration of your monitoring. It adapts automatically when you deploy something. Immediately it discovers and attach, and that was one of the biggest point that made a choice that made my mind to choose Instana.
What do you think? So now we are fundamentally in a juncture in terms of DevOps and GitOps, where there is a large amount of technology. There is probably a critical mass of people that have joined the DevOps movement. It's something that it's more or less given for granted. Now we start actually seeing people that are, how to put it, trying to resell their previous practices in the new guise to stay relevant. that is kind of the sad story with the bad actor that has killed Agile in the past. Chances are they will poison also DevOps. But do you think that the change is irreversible? That we are not going back to a more traditional, a more partitioned way of operating things?
I don't know, because in my opinion, the IT industry is a TikTok world. So we are always moving one way, then backward, then one way, then backward. If you look at, for example, the computers and the terminal and the way you use the computers and the way we interact, it all started with computers. Then there were mainframes and terminals just pushing the computers to the mainframe, and then we came back to desktop, and then we came to internet with server side computation, and so it's always going back and forth. So it's pretty tough to say if we revert, but it will definitely evolve differently, and probably pushed by the evolution of the hardware and the technologies. So that's always pushing that's what is pushing the industry towards the practices.
So history is repeating, but never the same.
Yes.
Right? And now the more higher level.
Never the same. We usually we add more layer of abstractions. That's what we're doing.
But that's actually a good sign. I mean, the more levels of abstraction have brought more the development aspect to light. If you look like what's happening with function as a service, that's the least amount of operation anybody has ever had to do to bring code in production. Yeah,
sure. But we are just inventing our future jobs. Because by adding layers, we add more and more potential jobs, and more. And it's becoming so complex that we probably need 1,000 of humans just to understand how a simple computer works from A to Z now.
Yeah, and now, since you no longer even have the access to the computer itself, troubleshooting things becomes like why is that function not terminating? It's fun. So how do you see we are going more and more towards development, and we want more and more automation, which means that GitOps may get more and more widespread. But when for example, I go on Twitter, there are already very strong opinions against it, that it's a bit of a cargo cult. What's your take?
I really don't know. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to give you my opinion on that, because I can understand why some people are pretty strongly against it. I think it's pretty philosophical. It really depends on the way you look at things and on your vision, and there is no. I don't know how to give you a strict opinion on that.
So you seem not to think that GitOps is all or nothing. It's more like a continuum where there are several pieces that you can glue together, but you don't need to do GitOps necessarily end to end.
And there are many. I look at it at many branches that will perhaps later merge or not, and all these parallel branches. Pick up the one that suits the most. I did the comparison in the beginning of the webinar. It's like choosing a programming language. It's useless to fight, to create a fight between PHP and Java. I mean, you can do whatever you want with both. Just look at what you want to do. What's your philosophy? What's your team? What are your team competencies, and make a choice.
And different languages are productive in different scenarios, right?
Yes.
So trying to make a SOAP application on PHP is a bit extreme. That's
sure.
So where do you think that GitOps is best positioned? Are there scenarios beyond cloud native on Kubernetes where you see GitOps catching on?
Scenarios beyond. You can do GitOps without whatever you want. First thing is GitOps is not only Kubernetes. You can do GitOps with traditional deployment, even without containers, as long as you have APIs or a way to interact with the system. And I lost my mind. Don't remember. Could you repeat the questions?
Yeah. So for example, I know people that have been doing GitOps without knowing it was GitOps for networking configurations.
Yes.
Since 10 years.
Yeah.
What
sure.
other scenarios do you foresee for that?
For networking, and a lot of people are doing such kind of thing on networking. So managing the configuration of their routers on repos and having automated push to them. You also you can also see in the IT, the simple IT administration world, where people are just provisioning computers for their employees, there is a lot of automation there, which is could be seen as GitOps also, where you push modifications or you push new applications to the computers of the whole companies just by adding an installer on a repository and pushing a few lines of code on not necessarily Git, but on centralized repositories.
Mm-hmm. Which actually, this is a good moment to remind our audience that you are super welcome and actually expected to interact with us and make questions. So yes. The first thing is, do you actually agree with this very permissive and loose definition of GitOps, that GitOps is about you declare what you want and you have some automation doing it without going dogmatic on it has to be cloud native, it has to be on Kubernetes, it has to be on cloud providers? Because I've heard people saying all of these things at different points in time.
But for example, on the cloud provider side, we start thinking about using Kubernetes as a service on Azure. I mentioned it, but basically we deploy our Kubernetes using RKE, so it's Rancher Kubernetes Engine, and it's also a declarative syntax that allows you to deploy and manage Kubernetes clusters. So when you want to add a new node or remove a new node, you declare it in the configuration, and then RKE just reconcile the cluster. If you want to upgrade your cluster to a new version of Kubernetes, you do it. So you don't need to be cloud native and use cloud native tools to. You can do it on on-premise solution. And the big advantage we see here is, for example, we have a potential customer that wants to have the environment deployed on his premises. We can say yes easily and without changing anything in the way we work, in our processes, in our pipelines. We are able to deploy their solutions and our solutions on their premises.
So fundamentally, as long as there is a Kubernetes enabled place, you can just go and deploy Altissia.
Yeah.
Which gives a lot of freedom and prevents you cost from having to package in a strange and different way.
Yeah, definitely, and also it allows us to move. I mean, we don't do it every day, but to move from one provider to another one if we want to. And we have one project which is moving from dedicated hosts to Azure Kubernetes platform.
Actually, the independence from providers, it's one of the aspects, a very interesting aspects of GitOps. The fact that you have a declaration of what your production has to look like, it means that it should be relatively easy to recreate your environment, for example, in case of disaster, for disaster recovery.
Yeah, or also if you want to provision a new environment for, I don't know, load testing or for penetration testing, you can easily provision an environment and then unprovision it. I've done for some demonstration, just renting a Kubernetes cluster, provisioning the environment for the demo, then unprovisioning it. It's pretty easy, and it doesn't take a lot of time. And that's one of the biggest win we got in Altissia, because in the past it took us, I think, more than 2 weeks to deploy a full environment. Now, I think the team won't tell the contrary. I think half a day or maximum a day is okay to have from nothing to a full working environment.
No, which is it's a cost saver. It helps people to get the product faster. Instana is on the same journey. When we started containerizing our backend, moving from package based, where we would package the Instana backend for Debian and Red Hat, and now we just ask you to deploy a Docker daemon, and we take it from there.
Yeah, and now our release manager manages most of the synchronization of the release and the coordination of the release. So we don't need to have a technical guy behind the computer.
What's your take on scaling GitOps? Is it something that becomes harder the more people you involve and the more technologies you need to put together, the more complex your system becomes, or does the complexity at some point plateau?
The complexity is always increasing, because you ask your system to do more and more complex tasks, and you interact with more and more tools that can fail independently or have issues independently. So when you have issues, debugging all these set of tools and finding what's going wrong is sometimes pretty complex. And that's also where Instana, I think, it is starting to go also, because you're starting monitoring Jenkins, for example.
Yes. And we did it because we were using it and we wanted to know how our Jenkins was doing.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's becoming complex, because, for example, on our side, we have Jenkins, which is interacting with Jira to push information about to tag the tickets with the different components that has been impacted based on the Git commit message or the branch name. We're using Rundeck to have a simple UI to do some actions like creating a release or preparing a release candidate, and it can fail at many places. And our Jenkins is running on Kubernetes, and the pipeline is running is provisioning the runners dynamically on Kubernetes also.
Okay, so there is a lot of moving parts.
Yes.
And what type of balance did you find in investing to get to GitOps? So you had to overhaul your monitoring, and you picked Instana for that. You have to, it sounds like you have to continuously invest in your CI/CD pipeline. And you need to invest in the integration between all the toolings, not only the one that deploys, but also the more people-orientated tooling like bug trackers and project management tools. So is it the amount of development seems to be constant, right?
Yes.
It's just the speed that you get in delivering changes that increases.
Yeah. So basically we maintain a set of a kind of team to manage that, and constantly working, making the things evolve. And also the tools are evolving. Look at Helm. It went from Helm 2 to Helm 3 with a lot of changes philosophically, but with some backward compatibility. Kubernetes is also moving quite fast with releases quite frequently, with parts going from alpha to beta to pod ready.
I'm expecting to see the other end, like alpha, beta, out of immediately.
So it's moving quite fast. Traffic also went from version 1 to version 2. So you have constant work, but the speed or the flexibility or the functionalities, the interaction or integration that all these tools can bring are evolving also and simplifying. So.
And something that is not related necessarily with GitOps, but it's more DevOps. What type of changes embracing the DevOps culture has brought in your developers? Did they start behaving differently?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. So for example, the one which are the most DevOps oriented are now spending probably more time looking at how their features and their product is going on production than really working on developing features. So they split their work in half time delivering features, but also half time making sure that the feature is working well. So they are more and more, in fact, business oriented, less technical oriented, but more and more business oriented, and really interested in how their feature is used, how their feature is behaving. Is it behaving well? Do you have are there issues? And in there, tracing all the observability that you can have is pretty important.
And that's actually something that I'm very excited about, because as a product manager, my job is not to deliver features or help features being delivered. It's about discovering problems and helping getting problems solved. Yes. And that is the more the developers get acquainted with how things are used, the more they understand the point of view of the customer, and the better the features that they will develop when necessary to solve problems will actually likely fill the gap.
Yes, and they are even becoming better than the product managers sometimes in understanding the needs, because they also start more and more using their own product, which could look like an evidence, but which is not for people who are really technically focused, because they are not interested really necessarily on the product, but more on the technical challenge.
And that actually has a way of making the job of a product manager a bit harder.
Yes.
I mean, I started product management in Instana before I was a staff engineer, but the boundaries are a bit blurring. Yeah. So also the engineers start knowing the customers, they start understanding the pain, and they come up with proposing solutions that before in the past was more a prerogative of the product aspect.
And the developers' challenge is more and more also the product managers.
And that's great, because it takes some very T-shaped professionals to be able to understand the problems and what solutions could look like in today's technology. There is so much variety. There are so many different ways to do something. There are so many decisions. The problems are getting more complex. Now, for example, Instana may be a bit extreme, because we make software that has to make you understand when other software breaks. And for us, the investment is forever increasing. The more technologies are released, the more we need to invest. It's very exciting. It also makes us do hard choices in terms of which technologies we want to invest on and which not.
Yeah.
But it also means that for us, there are always new ways that software breaks.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, with Docker came the home killer, the container restarting, Kubernetes, the crash loopbacks. But I mean, it's not new ways. In fact, it's always repeating the same stuff.
Yeah, but you need to tell that story to people that are not necessarily as technical or in the know as before, or that they may not understand all the layers of the stack. As a developer, you were supposed in the old good times of J2EE to understand the application server, but you may not have to think, or usually you didn't think about the sizing in production. How would it scale with so many threads on this load? Now you need to have that context to understand why the latency is increasing.
Yeah, I did. But people also, the industry pushes people towards higher levels and not trying to be interested in lower levels and lower layers. to come back to your question, there is also one point that I wanted to mention. So I started from the dev side, but from the ops side, you also see more and more ops people interested in the software development, because they need to adapt, and they need also to take the good practices of software developers, convention, coding guidelines, good patterns. So they need to learn that. And
versioning, validating their changes.
Yes, code review.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they need to learn from the software development, but they also it pushes them towards also software architecture, where before they were just stuck to the infrastructure architecture, or sometimes a bit higher level, talking about databases and how databases interact through a proxy or stuff like that. But now all these are mixed together. Software architecture and ops architecture are really mixed, and it's quite challenging to reconcile sometimes both, because developers tend to look at code-wise stuff and try to do think through code. Ops look at a service side and try to push services. And sometimes both are right, and both directions are correct, but you need to find a way to make sure that they agree on which side, and sometimes it's pushed toward deadlines and how fast you can deliver these. But it's really interesting because the architecture world is also changing quite a lot, and all the stuff are really now closer to each other.
Actually, I, for example, like very much tools like Pulumi that allows you to define in code what your infrastructure should look like, and you are no longer necessarily bound to declarative languages or YAML nowadays, which you know by now what I think of it. But it also allows you to do very interesting things with the code of the orchestration itself. You start having, like, let's be honest, Bash is awesome, but it's also somewhat limited.
I know you love Bash. I know you love Bash.
I do. It's like a Stockholm syndrome for me.
Yeah, but I mean, there are some people who can do pretty much everything with Bash.
Yeah, if we built an entire tile for Cloud Foundry in Bash, there's like 2,000 lines of Bash in here, and it all works, and it does tons of stuff. You can do everything with Bash. Little of it is pleasant to write. Let's so we have 10 minutes so far. I haven't seen many questions, so I guess it's a good sign. We still have roughly the same amount of attendees. Shall we have a demo? Shall we have a demo? So something that do you want to do a demo of how you do things at Altissia first? Do you have a laptop that works with that?
I need to check. So do your
all right. All right. So I am going to show something that you cannot do right now, but you'll be able to do pretty soon. And I'm going to. Can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes.
My sound went off exactly at the demo time, which was very spooky. I'm going to show you something with GitHub. Let me share the screen. Let's see if I managed to make it work. Yes, cool. So what I did yesterday was a GitHub action. I created a repository where lives the configuration for Instana agents with test YAML, a bunch of nonsensical YAML, like all the YAML. And I instructed GitHub through actions to execute a particular piece of code every time something changes on a branch. And this code is a GitHub action that is going to tell the Instana backend, to tell the agent to update its configuration through Git. Nowadays, Instana agents have a Git client built in, and you can instruct them with a couple of settings from where should the settings be fetched on startup and on restart of the agent. But something that will become possible soon is actually that the agent, without having to restart, can update its configuration. And let me do the other part of the setup of the demo. I'm going to show you a one of our internal units. And I'm going to start an agent on my local machine. So this is the unit where the agent is going to report. And now let me take, so I already have an agent reporting. Let's start fresh so that you know that there is no trick. I have an agent on my, I will soon have an agent on my machine that is instructed through these environment variables, Instana Git remote repository and Instana Git remote branch, to fetch its configurations from the Git repository I've shown you. So let's wait for the agent to start. Do you see my VS Code screen? Cool. You see that the agent has noticed that it has to create a Git repository. It fetched the configurations. Everything's fine. It connects to the backend. We're good to go. Now back to our demo. Let's see the agent appearing in Instana. It has a special region called GitOps demo, which will appear presently. Let me check that I'm running against this environment. Yes. And so there we go. This is the agent of my machine. When we look at the host, it has one tag, GitOps environment prod. Cool. Now I'm going to go in the code and uncomment some configuration that will add another tag. And commit. Remember, don't do this at home. Write good commit messages. Now, GitHub is going to run the GitOps action, and I'm going to show you how the action looks like later, just to give you an idea of how simple it is to set something up like this. The GitHub action is creating a container, and the update is successful. And now, let's go to Instana, and when the God of Demos feels good, we will see that a new tag will appear. This is the moment of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in each and every demo. Yes, actually, we can see that the agent has received started, yes, connected, it has rebooted, and there we go. Just like that. And every single piece of configuration that you can do with the Instana agent, you can version today with Git. Everything, including which Instana backend the agent should talk to, and where should the updates come from, or which version to use of the Instana agent. Everything is today versionable. And let me show you briefly how the how simple the GitHub action is. We are going to productize this and make official GitHub actions available. It is as simple as like a small bash script, because you can do everything with bash, right? and specifying a couple of parameters. Where is the API of the Instana backend? What is the API key? And which agent tag you want to have updated. So what's happening is that you can specify with dynamic focus a query that tells you which agents to trigger the update to. And in this case, I made an action that can use a tag for that. And what the action did was to tell the Instana backend to tell all the agents with the GitOps environment equal prod tag to update themselves. And that's how it worked.
That's great.
This is something that you can expect to be able to do yourself in probably the next couple of weeks. And we're going to make a blog post about, because this was the last piece of the puzzle. It was the fact that you could push to Git and have the agent automatically fetch from there. The fact that we integrated it with, we provided a GitHub action means that you can do exactly the same, for example, with Git hooks. All right, so demo worked. I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
Back to the slide deck. What did we do? We did the demo with Instana. Let's talk about a few minutes about the gotchas, the kind of things that can catch you unawares when doing GitOps. What's your take, Gregory?
Do you have a first one to Bootstrap? Because you're...
Oh yeah, I am a big fan of what you told me once.
Yes,
Forward,
the databases.
Backwards.
Yes, the databases.
It's not only databases. It's about data and state.
Yes. Yes. So stateless components are quite easy to upgrade, scale up, scale down, revert, etc. But all the stateful parts of your application is much more complex to manage, especially if you want to revert. Upgrading, scaling is still manageable, but reverting is really painful. So I usually take the database example because it's pretty, everyone understands it. When you want to upgrade a schema, or because you add a new column or you change the type of a column, upgrading is easy. It's an alter table, and sometimes you can also upgrade the data within the table by doing some computation. Reverting is much more complex because you have upgraded your data, you have upgraded your schema. In the meantime, new data came, and if you want to revert, then you cannot just take the step backwards. It's not as easy as just taking the step backwards. There are some strategies to do it properly, like instead of updating a column, you create a new one, you copy the data, you make triggers that copy lively the data from the old to the new one, and then you can easily revert. But putting that into practice is quite complex. It takes a lot of effort, but also it makes the upgrades much more complex, because when you work with big databases, copying sets of data takes a lot of time, and then in the meantime, your application either needs to handle the two states at a time, or needs to wait for the database upgrade to be done, and it's quite painful.
But to be honest, I mean, we have had this particular type of pain with Cassandra since day one.
Yes.
For example, the fact that Cassandra did not properly have a schema, and your application had to be aware of all types of versions of the data. Yeah. That's very cloud natives in the wrong way.
Yeah, indeed. One other point also, so I talked about stateless application. When you have APIs and you upgrade one component, and you have one API that changed its contract, so basically contract change. If you want to keep your application working, you need to support all the version of your API which are currently running, so all the endpoints, etc. So either you have API gateway that abstracts everything for you, or you need to have clients able to manage multiple versions of your API at the same time. And then you have all the strategy to choose in between. Do you duplicate the endpoints? Do you run multiple versions of your API at the same time? And how do you manage all that? So you need to have application and front application, especially being able to manage that, or you need to find a way to abstract that for the front end application.
Yeah, I mean, but the same we did with fundamentally making microservices that were independently versionable. Now complexity is everywhere.
Yeah. And that's one of the challenge we are tackling at Altissia currently. Is we started microservices by using inter-service API calls.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest problem there is that once one of the API updates the contract, change endpoints, etc. If you deploy that one, all the other API using these endpoints will start breaking, not working anymore. So you need to coordinate your releases, or you need to make sure that your application is able to manage all these different states and version of the API at the same time. And the path we choose is going to event-driven architecture,
mm-hmm.
especially also because HTTP calls are synchronous. So you need to implement circuit breakers. You need to implement logic if this API breaks.
Timeouts,
etc. And it's pretty complex because it's sometimes when you have one API calling two other APIs, how do you manage bad states, 500 errors or stuff like that? So EDD allows you to manage things asynchronously, and we use projections to make sure that all the APIs have all the data available for their business, and they listen to events and update their projections to do that. So we do event-driven. We're moving towards event-driven architecture with the dreaming goal of going to event sourcing.
So we are at the top of the hour, actually a few minutes after that. Becky, do you want to take back?
Michele, we have got a couple of minutes, although we're over. We can spare some time to answer a few questions. So if you do have any burning questions and you haven't submitted them already, please could you pop them in the question box to the right-hand side. And if we don't get back to you today, we'll be sure to reach out to you directly. I have got a question sent to me here, though. This is for you, Gregory. What is the biggest challenge in introducing GitOps from a human perspective?
So we talked a bit about it. So the fact that some people could be quite reluctant to these changes, and especially the ops people reluctant to move towards the development world by coding, basically coding or implementing coding standards from the software development world. Also, the fact that trust is pretty important in this whole culture, and that it's sometimes difficult to ensure that people trust each other, and because you put in their hand the possibility to deploy in production, so you need to trust your colleagues that they won't do bad things, or so you need really to trust people. And with trust and with great powers comes great responsibilities. People should feel very responsible of what they're doing, and they need to be pushed towards quality processes, doing proper code review, paying attention, because behind there is production and there are clients.
And there are people that rely on on your services,
Yes.
and when something goes boom, they actually feel pain, physical
Yes.
or not, depending what.
Yes, sure.
I have a question for you as well. So from the perspective of introducing GitOps in an APM tool, what are the biggest challenges or preconditions that someone may give for granted?
Well, from an industry perspective, one of the biggest challenges is maybe technological. APM tools are historically something for enterprises, and enterprises, in particular operators of the old school, they really liked to click on things, which has led the overwhelming majority of APM solutions out there to fundamentally hide their configurations in their backends. Having backends, for example, in databases is something that makes it harder to expose through a Git-based API. Something that I did in a previous life was actually to create a Git to REST API bridge for another APM solution that my employer was using, and it was not fun since the configurations were not file-based. I had to come up with a workaround to keep state about to reconcile the state of the configurations that were living in the cluster with those that I expected to be rolled out. Luckily, when I joined Instana, I found out that the agent was already built the right way with file-based configurations. So doing GitOps with that was really easy. There is also another aspect. It's the fact that, as I said, you can do with APM solutions, you can do GitOps and you should do GitOps. I'm very proud that Instana is the first APM to embrace that properly, also from a technology perspective. But you will also find people that are not able to adopt GitOps. So you will need to provide always a way to do things clicking around, which is unfortunate, but I don't think it's going to go away.
We are well over time now, and there are no further questions. So a link to view the on-demand webinar will be sent to you via email, or you can visit our website to access the recording. You can also check out our other upcoming webinars by visiting instana.com/webinars. And a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening. So thank you, Gregory, and thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Gregory. Thanks for being here.
Thank
Bye.
you.